Hello everyone, I'm Kevin, otherwise known as BX257, here to bring you another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review, and today I'll be taking a look at the 1985 G.I. Joe Transportable Tactical Battle Platform. Now this TTBP makes its first comic book appearance in the Old Marvel comic run of G.I. Joe in issue number 40. And makes its first animated appearance in the Sunbow animated G.I. Joe television series episode titled The Traitor Part 1. Now, as you might remember, I actually did a review on the TTBP many years ago, so I think it's about time that I did a newer version of it. The Transportable Tactical Battle Platform is not what I would consider to be a large playset. It's not like the 1983 headquarters or the 1992 headquarters for that matter, which were sprawling affairs. This is rather compact, but it's by no means small either. It's about 18 inches wide at its widest, about 16 inches deep, and about 10 inches at its lowest setting. And by that I mean it has adjustable height legs. So while you probably couldn't fit this inside of a shelving or display unit, it would actually be quite nice to fit on top of something, because these feet are actually a little bit inset, so it means that it can actually sit on something which was a little bit smaller than how the outer edges are quite wide. There are officially two ways that action figures and vehicles can get on and off of the Tactical Battle Platform. Well, technically there's a third way, but I'll get to that in just a moment. But the first and most obvious way is to rotate this drawbridge / ramp. And this is the way that you can get small vehicles like the 1985 Armadillo tank or motorcycles or really small vehicles up onto here. Now, as you can see, this thing had a little fold-out support here on the bottom. Unfortunately, this support is just about as far as it goes down, meaning that these legs, they have to be in their shortest mode in order for the drawbridge to actually work. Of course, you can fold this up and lower this down even further. And while this is kind of an extreme angle, it's still useful as a ramp down to the ground if you don't have another like building or whatnot over here, because this is, well, just a kind of a sheer drop really. But I do have to caution you to be very careful not to put too much pressure on this ramp, because it's only held in by these two little nub kind of hinge here. They can crack off if you just put too much pressure on here. But otherwise it's fairly sturdy. And on one side is the other way that figures can get into the base, and that is by this dangling ladder here. Even with the legs completely up, you're only adding about maybe like 3 inches, and that doesn't give enough of a gap for a figure, and a figure could look still pretty much natural trying to climb up this ladder, even when the legs are fully extended. Of course, the third way you can get onto the Tactical Battle Platform is if you land on it. And it has a very small helipad on here. Good enough for, of course, a 1984 Skyhawk, but it's also okay for the 1984 Shark as well. And again, a ladder is provided for figures to climb down the helipad onto the main base itself. G.I. Joe toys seem to love putting winches on things, and this thing has a little movable crane. Of course, it doesn't go up or down, but as you can see, it swivels around to service two different corners of its own base. And it has its own little retractable hook with this knob here. And the hook itself is actually the same type of hook you'd see on helicopters such as the 1983 Dragonfly and the 1986 Tomahawk. The battle platform has a well thought out quarter command station here, surrounded by a glass window for great observation and of course wind deflection if you're pretending this thing is at the high seas. In the corner we have a rotating searchlight, which you can actually pop out. I mean, it's not connected on the bottom. As well as a rotating chair. There's only one of them, unfortunately. Again, you can just pop this thing right out. If it interferes with you putting a lot more figures in there, you can just sort of pop it out and leave it out there. The command station actually has a lot of really nice detail, and it's also picked out with stickers as well, which is really cool. The command station has an opening which leads to a corridor, or basically a trench in this case, which ends in the ammunition storage area. The storage area itself is kind of sunken, so it has a tiny little ladder by itself, which leads to the main platform. I think this is a very realistic way of doing this sort of multi-level base without having to sort of compromise the way other playsets kind of do with having one side open just so your hands can access things. Not only do we have storage for weapons, we actually have 5 weapons included with the set. 5 rifles, which are remolds of previous existing action figure weapons. We have Stalker's rifle, Ripcord's rifle, Airborne's rifle, Snowjob's rifle, and Grunt's rifle. The guns are just held in by this little C-clip here, meaning it's fairly easy to take the guns in and out without having to worry about really cramming in there and possibly breaking the guns. But I'll just take the whole rack out by itself. And now I'm going to compare the 5 rifles from the battle platform to some other rifles which are very, very similar. These 4 on the bottom here are the originals which were issued with the figures. As you can see, they're a very, very dark gray. The battle platform rifles are just a slightly lighter shade of gray. And this one up here from the 1986 Outpost Defender are even slightly lighter gray than even these ones. But it's really hard to tell if you don't have them all here to compare them to. Of course, there are a few differences here. The Ripcord gun was unique to this set, as was the SVD rifle to the Outpost Defender set. But there are a few other details that you should be aware of. Of course, the best way to compare whether you have a mixed match set here is to compare your battle platform rifle set, I should say, to the Ripcord rifle because it's so unique. There's just nothing else like this. So you can compare the actual colors. And of course, the type of plastic. The plastic was slightly more brittle. And as you can see, when I do the close-ups, the barrels and some parts, they just go a bit white with stress far more easily than any of the other plastics used for the other rifles. On the left I have the battle platform rifles. On the right I have the originals for only 2 of these, because these 2 actually have differences in their molds. For some strange reason, the battle platform sights on the Stalker gun and on the Snowjob gun are actually shaved off on the top. And here it may be a little bit hard to see, but the 2 battle platform rifles are just a tiny bit darker than what you would have on the 1986 Outpost Defender rifles. But the Outpost Defender rifle molds themselves seem a little bit softer, a bit sloppier than what you have with the battle platform rifles or even the originals. One of the 2 main armaments for the battle platform is this double machine gun, which can swivel around on its base in a 360-degree arc. I'm guessing this is really only meant for anti-aircraft, not only due to the radar dish which is affixed on the back, but the fact that you can elevate it really high like this. But you can't depress it all that well. It has a lot of sculpting right in front of the cannon, so I'm guessing this really isn't for anti-ship or anti-ground personnel combat here. One very interesting thing is the gun barrels themselves. They have these caps on the front. I'm assuming that they meant for these to be hollow, so they're more like gun barrels, but I don't know why they're so flat and cut off like this. It's a separate piece that you have to put on here for the whole construction. The radar is actually surprisingly easy to just pop off, and this is something which can be kind of found on its own sometimes. It looks like something off of the US's flag, but it's really not. It's really just supposed to go over here. And what I find very interesting is the very odd plug that they use to plug this thing on here. It's basically the peg and hole hook here used in the construction of this. So it actually covers up basically a peg. Aside from that, you also have some engine detail from this removable cover on the base. The other main armament is, of course, this battery of 4 missiles, which is on a turret, which swivels 360 degrees, just like the machine cannon, and elevates, just like the machine cannon, and doesn't really depress all that well. Not that you would need it for missiles, anyway. The missiles themselves look very much like the Sky Striker medium missiles. Of course, these are very distinctive because of this large sort of collar in the middle. I have heard that they are interchangeable with those Sky Striker missiles, but I don't really see the point in that. And just like the other side of the platform, we also have some engine detail on here with a removable cover. Oddly enough, the covers look very similar to each other. We'll just grab the other one from the other side. But they are slightly different size, so they're not interchangeable. Again, we have some really nice detail there. Keen-eyed observers will notice that I've actually had these legs on just sort of willy-nilly, and not perfectly correct according to the instructions. However, you do have to understand that these are perfectly square legs going into perfectly square holes, and however you orient them, they're going to function the same way. However, like I said, according to the instructions, they're actually meant to go like this. These cross-beam details are only on one side of the leg and are meant to face forward where the drawbridge is. We have 3 of these long legs, which are all the same size, but we also have a 4th one, which is actually a bit smaller than the rest. The method to make the legs extend is mechanically simple, but still very frustrating because the tolerances are all kind of all over the place. It doesn't help that this is 30-plus-year-old plastic that you're doing this to. But on the back here, you can see the sort of U-shape here cut out, and that's because that the portion in the middle is actually a key, which fits into the teeth, which goes up and down the leg here, holding it into various places, which you'll see in a moment. But how you're supposed to do that, you're supposed to squeeze these portions here, like so. And this is supposed to come down and extend. And while this may seem very easy, of course, it's very easy to do if you have one of the legs where all the legs detached. But it's incredibly difficult to do it with the stuff attached already to the base. Of course, it's fairly easy. Like I said, it's a square leg going into a square hole, so you just sort of pop it out whenever you want to. But as you can see, these are the teeth that you have here. And I'm struggling to actually get into one of these holes because now I just sort of slipped the whole thing out. And there, I think I've gotten the maximum elevation, which is about maybe like 2.5 inches here. So I'll just put this right back in. And now this is at its maximum elevation. But as you can see now, the drawbridge, which was perfectly aligned for the lowest leg length, is now a bit useless here. Just try this as a ramp, and it's at an extreme angle here. It's not very useful. However, this height is perfectly aligned for the USS flag's deck plates. So if you have this on the side of a USS flag, this is just perfect for rolling on and off equipment. So if you're wondering where the Transportable tactical battle platform comes in, well, it's not written on the instructions, that's for sure. But on the back of the box, this is what we have as an example. We have 4 dragonflies picking this thing up with their tow cables. Who on earth would have 4 of these dragonfly toys in order to just pick up one base? So on the 4 corners of the TTBP, we have tow cleats. One in the command center, one in the corner of the ammunition storage area, and 2 on the front here. And just to use the cleat that's on the front, and an example of a hook, this one being from the 1991 battle wagon, but it's again the same mold that was used for the Dragonfly, the Tomahawk helicopter, as well as this base. So you just hook it on like this. I lift it up a little bit, and that's pretty much how this thing is supposed to go. You're supposed to have 4 of these in order to distribute the weight equally, but it should be able to lift this thing up fairly well. The only reason why I wouldn't do it any further than that is because I'm afraid that this 30-year-old plastic would just snap this cleat off, just pretty much cleanly off, really. The TTBP is perfect for modern era figures. While it may seem a little bit weird that it doesn't have any foot pegs all over this thing, it's not that unusual, seeing as it has a lot of flat surfaces. So it doesn't really need foot pegs, and thus it doesn't get in the way of the modern era figures, which don't have the same foot peg size as the vintage figures did. Of course, the modern figures being a bit more 4-inch size and 3 3/4 inch, they're not hitting their heads on any ceilings because, well, the TTBP doesn't have any. The seat, the only seat which this thing comes with, does not have a back peg, so that doesn't get in the way of the modern figures, which of course don't have the same back peg size as vintage figures. The Tactical Battle Platform is one of my favorite play sets, mostly because I think I appreciate it more as an adult. If I had gotten this as a kid, I'm not sure that I would find the same enjoyment as I do now, because it has a lot of great features as a display piece, and as something which I can think of as being very realistic. Now, some people argue that the design is very flat and kind of looks like an oil rig platform without the drilled tower on it. And I think that's the point. It's very realistic in that it's very open, but you have spaces where figures can hide and duck into. You have covered pieces like the command center here. You have an opening underneath here, so the ground itself is part of the playset now. And of course you can raise it up a little bit in case you need that extra height to fit a vehicle underneath there. It's just very practical and very, like I said, very realistic as to how you would actually use this base. Okay, so it may look a little bit plain when it's empty, but then so do most playsets. Here you have a lot of really nice spots for really small vehicles and figures. And you don't have to buy a medium-sized or large-sized vehicle in order to bulk this thing up. It's actually fairly cheap in order to make this thing come alive. If there's one fault that I have to give the battle platform, is that in its empty form, you really see that there's not much battle going on here. Its main armaments are only on one side. It really should have had something on this side. Now, this was clearly an accident here. But when I took a look at this 1986 laser artillery weapon base, I realized that the shapes are very, very close to how the octagonal platforms are. Now, as a very flat base, you can pretty much chuck this anywhere. But I discovered that you can actually replace the helipad with the LAW. No modifications necessary, and it fits in, and it's very secure. And speaking of attaching the law, this is my new favorite way of displaying the battle platform, with the 1984 Mortar Defense Unit playset pieces scattered all over its surface. The green of the Mortar Defense Unit pieces exactly matches the green of the law, so it actually spreads out the colors throughout the base. If you're looking for a TTBP on the aftermarket, they're fairly easy to find with 95% of the structure intact and in usually fairly good condition. It's a fairly sturdy playset, to be perfectly honest. However, if you want one which is perfectly mint, it goes from a fairly cheap affair to something which is a bit more expensive. Obviously, the tiny rifles, which look a lot like many other rifles from the series, tend to bulk up the price a little bit. You have the searchlight, which is often missing. You have things like the panels, which are kind of hard to see in some photos. So if they're missing, you might not even realize it. You have the radar dish, and of course you have an antenna, which, well, basically antennas for any base or vehicle in the G.I. Joe line is usually missing. Are supposed to be what you squeeze in order to make this sort of air. You just hook it up like this. Well, that's all the time I have right now. Please check out my Facebook page for more information and behind the scenes photos for these reviews. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for next time to see another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. See you then.